Alright guys, today's video is about author's purpose and author's point of view. We've talked a little bit about author's purpose already. We're going to build on what we learned before, and the essential questions that we're going to be exploring for these concepts is how can we determine an author's purpose and point of view, or POV, in a text? Why is it important to do so? The first term that I'm going to introduce for today is the author's point of view, and it's sometimes called the author's viewpoint. Those two terms mean the same thing. It's just what the author thinks about or feels about a subject that they're writing about. And as you can imagine, the way an author feels about what they're writing about is going to be based on their own personal beliefs and biases. So remember, we talked about bias in our notes last time. Bias is just when the author has a preference for one thing or one group over another thing or group. And we all have bias. We have to watch out for it when we're reading to understand where the author is coming from and where it is they're trying to lead us as readers. We might not like where they're going, or maybe we're open to hearing another side's opinion about things. Either way, we need to watch out for bias in the informational texts that we read. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about author's purpose, which is why an author chose to write a text, what their reason for writing it was. We're going to use that acronym PI again to help us remember the three main reasons that an author might choose to write a text. The first letter in PI is P for persuade. Persuade is another word for convince or to make somebody believe what you believe, and that's exactly what an author who is trying to persuade you is doing. They're trying to make you believe or think or feel the same way they do about the topic that they're writing about. Some things to keep in mind about when the author's purpose is to persuade you is that they're going to mix opinion and facts together to try to make their point to win you over to their side. The author is going to pick facts that back up their opinion, and they're going to try to ignore the facts that go against it. By being picky about which facts you are using in your writing, you are going to have bias automatically, right? Anytime that you're trying to convince somebody to believe the same way that you believe, bias is going to be involved. So we have to be careful whenever we read a persuasion piece and watch for the bias in it so that we understand what's going on. Some examples that we have of persuasive texts would be like advertisements or commercials. You could find persuasion in editorial pieces in the newspaper where an editor is making an argument about something, and speeches are typically trying to persuade people to do one thing over another or to feel one way over another. The I in PI stands for inform. So the author wants to teach or explain to the reader about the topic that they are writing about. In an informational piece, there should be very little opinion. Some might still pop in, but you should minimize it as much as possible. It should be mostly facts. There can still be bias in a piece that is meant only to inform people, because authors can still choose which pieces of evidence they include in their writing. So be mindful that just because something has very little opinion in it, it could still have some bias based on the facts that the author is including in the piece. So for example, in Japan, their textbooks don't have anywhere near as much information as the textbooks in the US do about World War II. And largely that's because Japan lost World War II and because Japan did a lot of horrible things. So Japan biases their textbooks by not including all of the information to try to make themselves look a little bit better. Some of that same stuff happens in our textbooks. Some of the stuff that happened to Native Americans and stuff in our history textbooks gets left out, so we don't have a full picture. That's why when you're reading something to write a report or something like that, that you should be looking at multiple sources so that you have a fuller understanding of what actually happened in a historical event. Some examples of pieces that usually focus on informing a reader about something are reports, textbooks, and biographies, which are the life stories of famous people typically. The last piece of pie, is the E, which stands for entertain. When you entertain somebody, you're just giving them something fun to do. And if it's an informational text, it can be a combination of facts and opinions. We should still kind of be aware of bias in entertainment pieces, but we don't have to be quite as on alert for them, because when we're reading for entertainment, we're just reading for fun. We're not looking to have our minds changed or to learn about anything really. So you might be wondering, what kind of informational text has the main purpose of entertaining? And that would be something called a memoir. A memoir is where usually a person kind of writes a short autobiographical piece about some silly event that happened in their life, or maybe it was some life-changing event that happened to them. But they're mostly just telling you about their lived experience, and it's mostly meant to entertain you. Okay, the last thing that I want you to know about author's purpose is that some people, the last thing that I want you to know about author's purpose is that some pieces have more than one purpose. So for example, with that Hatshepsut video that we watched together, it had the primary purpose of teaching us about Hatshepsut. But it also had a secondary purpose, or a second reason, to entertain us. So that piece was trying to do two things at once, but the main focus of it was that we were supposed to learn something about Hatshepsut and how she was being erased from history. Okay, so I want you to understand that an author's point of view, the author's viewpoint, is going to shape how they approach the purpose of their writing. So how they view the world and their opinions about things it's going to shape how they try to persuade you, or what the beliefs even are that they're trying to make you believe in. Their viewpoint is going to also shape how they try to teach you about things, right? So keep in mind that the author's viewpoint and their purpose are often very much tied to each other. Right, so remember, you need to go back and write your summary about your notes. You need to try to answer the essential questions and or explain what you learned in at least 3 sentences. And I went ahead and I gave you an example question that you could use to help guide the questions that you create for your notes. Remember that the questions that go in the question column, you can put vocabulary words in there. You can put study questions that you think I might use on a quiz or a test, just to help prepare yourself for when we do actually have those things. So the example question that I came up with here was, how does bias show up in a text? And then I could use that question to help me think that through and prepare myself for a quiz or test about author's purpose and author's point of view. All right, guys, make sure that you complete the Edpuzzle, and I'll see you tomorrow.